welcome back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. This is a Q&A episode that we recently did on some mountaineering and trail-based questions that I think you'll really enjoy. There's several different topics that we cover in this one that I wanted you to have a heads up on before you dive in deep, because I think that you'll be drawn to hear some of the answers with regard to these. So, with several different questions, really, as they pertain to trail hiking and nutrition, specifically on really hard multi day expeditions, hikes, hunts, etc. We kind of like this is kind of how Valley to Peak started, and then it slowly morphed into developing programs for people for training and preparing for stuff like this. And so I like doing these too because I know that nearly everyone that listens to the podcast has an interest in the topic. So I like to be able to give, good reliable information on those things too. And so this was really good because one of these questions pertained to some things that I've said in the past and them questioning those, which is great. So I wanted to be able to provide some clarity. So we cover some information on protein intake and the lower thresholds that I've recommended, when everybody else is always trying to push it, especially on the trail. We cover a couple of questions on a 9-day expedition that someone has and how to make sure they're well fueled every day for that. We cover some questions about how to get non-perishable protein into multiple day trips and a variety of other things. So hopefully you enjoy it. You can probably hear I'm losing my voice a little bit, but I don't think that that will take away from the information. At least I hope not. So without further ado, here are some of the Q&As that we've had recently, and we hope you enjoy. We've got several different questions to sort through today, which I think is awesome, and it really you guys do a phenomenal job about being curious on things that other people haven't asked. And so we're going to sort through several of them today, most of them related to trail nutrition or training, and cover these. The first one alone has three questions woven inside of it, so it's going to take us a little bit of time to move through that one. It's around protein. It's around several different things, but it's a really really good question because of how many different cans it opens that most people don't generally think of. Depending on how long it takes me to get through that one, will probably depend on whether or not we're able to make it to the others. But I'm going to do my best. And even if I can make it through the ones that I have planned, there are still other ones in here that are great that I won't have time to answer on this Q&A, but we'll definitely tee those up for the next Q&A, and we'll cover those. So here's the first one. Kyle, I hope that this makes sense as I won't be able to catch the live meeting. Apologies as it's a fairly long question. I went back to the presentation on the 9th of December in regards to a reduction of protein on trail to about 1.32 grams of protein for every kilogram of body weight. And for those who don't have a calculator handy, that's 0.6 grams per pound of weight. Deciding if I want to give context to this question now, or let me finish the question. So he's asking about a previous recording that I did about where I said when you're on trail, you can go lower in protein. You state that this is due to only wanting to recover, not build a muscle. I take this that it could be sustained on a longer term basis with no issues. The explanation behind it being as long as we adjust for extra carbs for the additional exertion used, then we could be able to aim for this lower target while we are still in a calorie deficit. Is this correct thinking process? So some context would be, let me rephrase this question, give you some context, and then we can answer it. He's basically saying, is a lower protein intake of 1.3 grams per kilo or 0.6 grams per pound sustainable long term as long as carbs are increased to cover that extra energy burn so you don't lose muscle. So, the typical protein target to build muscle, like that lower threshold where the light switch gets turned on to build the muscle, is about zero point 0.7 grams per pound. My recommendation for zero point 0.6 when you are on the trail is because the goal on the trail is not to build big muscles. It simply is to recover the ones that have been worked. And so his question is if the energy increase, if the amount of calories we're using in a day is really, really high, and I make up for that energy burn by increasing my carbohydrate intake, will that lower protein threshold be okay? And the answer to that is yes, because the entire goal of increasing your carbohydrate intake is so that your body is not having to use the energy that you take in from protein to have energy. So remember, our three main macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Each of them have their own responsibility in human nutrition. Carbohydrates are for energy, protein, you do. Excuse me. Protein is for recovery and repair of the muscle. Dietary fat is for the health and transport of hormones. So the goal of getting sufficient carbohydrate is so that protein does not need to be used for energy. So you definitely could go towards that lower threshold if you wanted to. You know, I would say though, if you're talking about doing this whenever you are at home, it's probably because you feel like whatever your target protein needs are based off of that original calculation, you simply can't stomach. And I would say that that is still okay. And actually, the third part of his question here in a second addresses this a little bit more. So you definitely could do it over a longer period of time. But again, I think like just that extra zero point 0.1 gram per pound, or in this case, 0.32 grams per kilo, it just covers your basis, right? There is always rapid protein turnover, meaning your body is requiring some and you are taking some in. Having that little bit of extra is like an insurance policy. So, yes, you can shoot lower if you want to. Maybe you don't like the taste of protein. Maybe you find it hard to meet because you don't eat meat. Maybe there could be a variety of reasons you want to go lower, but the answer is yes, that you can. Here's the second part of his question. And a final question regarding the rule of 60 grams being a maximum the body can handle for carbs over an hour. Are there any rules about what the body can also absorb for protein and fats per hour? I'm curious, as I'm guessing it may also depend on the different type of protein and fat. There's a key word that you put in here that is important to pay attention to, and that is what the body can handle. The rule of 60, as assigned to carbohydrates, particularly on the trail, is because that's what the gut can handle. You could eat 500 grams of carbs in a single sitting, and if the gut could tolerate it, the body would know what to do with it. So that same premise carries over into proteins and fats. You are limited by what the gut can handle, and there are a variety of different reasons that would make this vary from person to person. And a great example of this is dietary fat. You may have someone who eats a relatively low dietary fat intake on a day to day basis, mostly fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, whole grains, etc., who goes out to dinner and gets a really, really rich and indulgent dish like chicken creamy Alfredo, for example, and has a ton of gut problems because their body is not used to that much fat. You may have another person who regularly follows a high fat diet, eats that same dish, and has no problems whatsoever because the gut can handle it. But when you talk about the difference between the gut handling something and the body handling something, that is the cutoff. The body has reservoirs. So any excess, be it protein, carbs, or fats, is going to first fill those reservoirs in those pools. Once those reservoirs and those pools are filled to the brim, if we continue to eat beyond that point, it is going to store it in long-term storage. It's going to store it as body fat, right? And so there's no single amount in a given meal that you can or can't absorb based on the body. Those pools, those reservoirs are going to determine what happens to that, whether it's used in the moment, whether it's used for energy, or whether it gets stored for long-term body fat. But what the gut can handle would be highly individual and based off of a lot of different things. What type of diet you're used to following, your personal makeup, for a variety of different things. Here's a third part of his question. Just as a real life example, I get to the end of my day and I realize that I'm lacking for protein in the day. So I take a much larger dose in that meal to try to play catch up. I may have taken too much for it to be effective. Is there a protein drink that is marketed with a high gram of protein per dose, however much of that protein is going to be able to use? Would it depend on the type of protein, such as a 30-gram whey protein isolate or a 60-gram whey protein concentrate? So basically what he's asking is if I've done a really poor job through the course of the day, not staying on top of my protein intake by micro dosing it, say 20, 25, 30 grams per meal, I get to the end of the day and realize I am too far below that protein threshold that I need to hit, call it 120 grams in a day. Can I then make up 80 grams of protein intake in that sitting? And the answer is yeah, I mean, you certainly could, but what we find holds the best is regular microdosing of protein through the day. And microdosing meaning that you take your total daily protein needs and you distribute those evenly among 3, 4, 5 different meals per day, however it is that you like to eat, as opposed to this one giant hit at one time. Because part of what recovers, repairs, and grows a muscle is that there is protein available in the bloodstream when the body goes to pull from it, when that turnover happens. If there's nothing there, you're missing an opportunity for growth and repair. This is one of the many reasons if you're trying to improve fitness, if you're trying to grow a muscle, if you're trying to be faster, if you're trying to be better, if you're trying to do anything that has to do with performance nutrition, there may be nothing worse for you than intermittent fasting because there is no nutrition at different times in the day where there's no nutrition in the bloodstream for the body to pull from and you're missing out on the opportunity for growth and repair. So all that to say, yes, you can go for the lower protein threshold if you want, so long as you're not in a calorie deficit. If you're in a calorie deficit and at the lower protein threshold, you're really missing an opportunity to provide insurance to the muscle and making sure that you're not losing any muscle. There is no real um, maximum that the body can take, minimum or maximum that the body can take for protein because there's a difference between what the body can handle and what the gut can handle. The gut's individual, the body has reservoirs. And then number 3, yes, I suppose you could make up your protein needs for whatever you're lacking on the back end, but I would prefer, and we even find in literature that microdosing of protein over time stimulates more muscle growth than having one big shot in a single sitting. So, try to stay on top of it if you can. Number 2, the second question that we have is this one. This is very likely too basic or too simple or has been asked 100 different times. I'm new to the training program. I am new to hiking. I'm new to trekking. Could you give me a remedial explanation of daily nutrition intake, perhaps with micros, but to be honest, I don't really know how to work with those anyway. Can you tell me how to fuel for training and any changes that need to happen during the actual trek itself? For context, I am planning a 9-day trek to Poon Hill and Mardi Himal in Nepal, and I've never done anything like this before, so I'm most concerned about the 9 consecutive days and how to stay fully successfully fueled over that time. Thank you. So, the bulk of the question is, can you provide kind of an explanation of what to do while on this actual hike to stay well fueled for the duration of it, and without necessarily talking about the macros. So, number one, I would say this, because you are training to prepare to go on this, invest some time and learn about the macros. They are not that complicated when you start to dive into them. The internet has overcomplicated them, and that is why we have put out a number of free resources that you can use to work through and get a better understanding of them. When you know that, it not only gives you what you need on these individual days, but it provides what's maybe most important on big expeditions, which is confidence. If I talk to you in terms of generalities, you're never going to wonder, are you close to this number? Because nutrition is such an individualized thing. If I say, oh, well, just make sure that you're eating pretty regularly and make sure that you have some protein. I mean, that alone is going to leave question marks like, well, what is the regularity? And if you're telling me I should have protein, but I don't know what the macros are, what foods have proteins? Does that mean I should avoid carbohydrates? Whereas if I were to tell you, okay, well, since you're going on this hike, you want to be sure that every time that you sit down and eat, there is a source of carbohydrate, there is a source of dietary fat, there is a source of dietary protein on that plate. If you do that, you're covering your bases to make sure that you have energy in the muscle, you have repair for the muscle, and you have plenty of fat for the transport or different nutrients that you need. So I would say know that. Number two, the absolute key to excelling on multiple day expeditions, hikes, hunts, whatever. The absolute most important thing is that every day you are on top of your nutrition. The key to feeling as strong on day 9 as you did on day 1 is not missing a beat on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Not missing that beat includes knowing what your personal nutrition needs are, your calories, your different macronutrients that make up those calories. Because when you have those numbers, then it just becomes a simple game of plugging and playing. Basically, what that means is okay, here are my numbers. Now I get to decide what food am I going to eat to meet those numbers. And even that is simpler than it sounds because you begin with the question of what do I like? What do I like to eat when I'm doing these really challenging training hikes? What always sounds good to me? Do not think, and one thing we preach all the time, do not think along the lines of what should I have? You should be asking instead, what do I want? When you know that, you're going to eat it, and there is no way to stay on top of your fuel like actually liking what you have. So, I would say spend some time learning about those macronutrients, spend some time learning about calories, and then start to build your plan because it's not only going to give you the fuel that you actually need, it's going to create a confidence that you will never have just kind of trying to get, around that. And ask for help. If you don't understand it, we'd be happy to help you. There's free resources. There's other resources that we've created that are very low cost. You can find on the website ranging from $10 to $99. We'd be happy to help you, but staying on top of your nutrition every single day will ensure that by the time you get to day 9, you're not just like surviving, you're absolutely thriving, excelling, and loving every second, every step that you take because there's plenty of fuel in the muscle. Without having a very basic understanding of food and the macros and what they do, it'd be hard to tell you that. And if you have this much time, energy, money, resources invested in this trip, do not let a very small knowledge gap be the barrier between you enjoying it. Don't be intimidated by that knowledge gap and going out there and learning about it. And that thing then stands between you having a okay trip and a really, really great trip. This is a barrier that is not is not too big to get over. So spend some time learning about it, and we'd be happy to help you. All right, number 3. You mentioned flu-like symptoms, which correspond with what sounded like the phase when we are recovering from nutrient depletion, but perhaps I misunderstood. Sometimes I have a flu-like feeling after completing multi-day hikes, especially if it's cold outside. I'd always associate it with bodily stress. However, hearing you talk makes me rethink my assumption. Not 100% sure what the question is, but I will say this. Don't rethink your assumption and don't draw a line between bodily stress and the body trying to recover from that stress and nutrition depletion. They are one and the same. One of the reasons you feel this generalized stressed flu-like feeling after multi-day hikes that are generally really high in miles and really demanding on you is because the body is stressed. I mean, hiking and running and all that is healthy, but, like, to a point, at some point, it starts to become a little stressful. Adding to that stress is the fact that you're probably not covering your nutrition needs. So, it could be one and the same. You could not be fueling well, and that's contributing to the feeling that you're having of these, like, flu-like symptoms, but you also may be fueling just fine. It's the overall hike that's causing it, and knowing your numbers, like we talked about in the prior question, can help you verify, is this nutrition or is this just the stress from the hike? I'll give you an example. We did a death hike, I think it was last year, where we did the Grand Canyon rim to rim twice, tried to do it in 2 days. And a vast couple guys did the full thing, and a vast majority did, 70, 80 miles and 15,000, 20 vertical feet, whatever it was. And when I got home from that trip, even though I'm 100% positive I did everything right on the fueling end of things, I spent the better part of a week just feeling like I had the flu. Not necessarily stuffy nose, cough type of deal, but just general fatigue, no motivation, no energy, just very, very flu-like symptoms aside from the runny nose. That was just from all of the climbing and the stress that surrounded that event itself, even though I nailed the training. So I wouldn't necessarily separate those 2. Um, and think that, you're missing something, but knowing your nutrition numbers can help you rule out whether or not it was nutrition or if it was just the stressful hike itself. I think we're on 3. Could you list some higher protein, non-perishable protein ideas for meals which are not tuna for a multi-week backpacking trip? Yeah, I can. So I'm going to break these down into 4 categories, and one of those categories, although not tuna, is similar to tuna. So the first one's this: some of the more obvious low work items. These would be things like beef jerky or jerky of any kind for that matter, non perishable meats like salami. There's so many nitrates and preservatives in those that it's probably not going to go bad on multi-day treks. I've used really low fat cheese. Low fat cheese prevents it from going rancid when it can't be refrigerated, prevents it from getting too slimy. So those are some options. Less obvious, still low work options would be adding protein powder to things like your morning oatmeal or TVP to meals. That's texturized vegetable protein, which is like a soy based crumble that takes on the flavor of whatever you're adding it into. Another option along those lines would be buying one of those big 10-pound cans of freeze dried chicken or beef and then supplementing that to your freeze dried meal for the evening. We generally take these out of their factory packaging anyway and put them into smaller Ziploc bags, which saves so much space. And when I do that, I might take some additional freeze dried chicken from a 10-pound can, add it to my main meal, and that would increase the protein intake. Less obvious, but more work, and my personal favorite way to include more protein is that you make some DIY options. The way that I do this is I make a really high calorie DIY granola cereal in the morning with protein. And then I also make a really high calorie, bar or muffin type of thing that has oats and nuts and dried fruit and peanut butter and protein powder and chocolate and all of these things in it. And they're very, very calorie dense, but also carry, another 30 grams of protein or so. Now, you could use things like nuts, grains, hemp hearts, flax, blah, blah, blah. But those are all really high carb foods that happen to have protein. And it's going to take a ton of it to get you to the protein limits you're trying to hit. So I wouldn't rely on that. Another option I love is putting dried and salted edamame in a trail mix. That increases the protein intake. And then finally, would be if you don't like tuna, they now make the same type of packaging for anything from pork to chicken to tofu or spiced seitan or spiced really anything that you want that you can add to um, your different meals. So thanks for listening this week. We'll be back again with several new episodes throughout the course of the month. And as always, if you've got questions, you can send those to us at info@v2pnutrition.com. If you got a couple of extra minutes on your hand, it really is helpful to us if you go in, rank the show, leave a comment, share it with a friend. If there was some information in it that you have found helpful that maybe you guys have been talking about, that is a tremendous help to us and we appreciate it. Look forward to joining you again in a couple of weeks. Send over questions. We'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks. Have a good week.